The ceiling in the guest room of our friend's house in Chicago was a map of unfamiliar cracks. For 12 years, my life with Elena had been a series of well-lit rooms and predictable rhythms. I was a man of quiet habits, the one who remembered anniversaries, the one who handled the taxes, the one who believed that a solid marriage was simply a matter of showing up and being reliable. We had driven 6 hours from our quiet suburban life to visit Marcus and Sarah, friends from Elena's college days whom I barely knew. It was our third night there. The air in the city was humid, smelling of old brick and lake water. Around 11 p.m., Elena had complained of a crushing migraine. "Go ahead to the bar with them, David," she whispered, pressing a cold washcloth to her forehead. "I just need sleep and silence. I'll only ruin the vibe if I tag along." I didn't want to go. I wanted to stay and rub her temples, but she was insistent, almost frantic. So I left. I sat in a dimly lit jazz club 3 blocks away, nursing a drink I didn't want, while Marcus and Sarah laughed about stories I wasn't part of. But something felt off. A glitch in the narrative. Elena had left her specialized migraine medication at home, something she never did. I excused myself early, telling our hosts I wanted to check on her. I walked back through the quiet, orange-lit streets of the North Side. When I reached the house, I didn't use my key. I stood on the sidewalk, looking up at the guest room window. The light was on, and then I saw a silhouette. It wasn't Elena. It was a man, standing by the window, checking his watch. I felt a sudden, icy void open in my stomach. I wasn't in a friend's house anymore. I was a trespasser in a life I no longer recognized. I walked up to the porch, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. Before I could reach for my key, the front door opened from the inside. This opening establishes the disruption of the safe zone. By moving the setting to a foreign city and a friend's house, the narrative strips David of his home field advantage. Psychologically, David is an includer. He seeks harmony and follows the social script. Elena, however, is utilizing the alibi of physical pain, the migraine, to create a window of opportunity. The point of no return isn't the discovery of the silhouette, but the moment David notices the missing medication. This small, objective detail shatters his willful blindness. He moves from a state of social compliance to predatory observation. The foreign ceiling and the unfamiliar cracks symbolize the internal fragmentation of his marriage. The foundation he thought was solid is revealed to be someone else's architecture entirely. The man who walked out of the house was tall, dressed in a dark pea coat, moving with a confident, silent stride. He didn't see me in the shadows of the overgrown hedge. He walked to a black sedan parked around the corner and vanished into the city traffic. I entered the house quietly. The living room smelled of Sarah's expensive candles and something else. A faint, citrusy cologne that Marcus didn't wear. I climbed the stairs, my footsteps muffled by the heavy carpet. When I opened the guest room door, the light was off. Elena was under the covers, her breathing deep and rhythmic. "Elena," I whispered. David? You're back early?" she murmured, her voice thick with feigned sleep. "How's the head?" "Better." The darkness helped. I sat on the edge of the bed, my hand brushing against the nightstand. There was a small, damp ring on the wood, the mark of a glass that had been there recently. Elena didn't have water by the bed when I left. The next day, the ordinary routine of the trip felt like a minefield. We went to brunch, we visited a museum, we walked along the pier. I watched Elena. I noticed the way she and Sarah exchanged quick, knowing glances. I noticed the way Marcus seemed overly loud, almost desperate to keep me engaged in conversation. "So, David," Marcus said, leaning in over his coffee, "Elena tells me you're thinking of expanding the firm. Big moves, man. Big moves." I hadn't told Elena I was expanding the firm. I had only mentioned it in a private journal I kept in my laptop bag, a bag that had stayed in the guest room while I was at the jazz club. The realization hit me like a physical blow. It wasn't just Elena. It was all of them. Our friends, the people whose house we were sleeping in, were the keepers of her secrets. I was the only one in the room who wasn't in on the joke. This section explores the gaslighting of the group. David is experiencing a social betrayal that is often more damaging than the infidelity itself. Elena is practicing boundary dissolution, involving their hosts in her deception, which creates a false reality that David is forced to navigate. Marcus's slip-up about the firm reveals a breach of digital privacy, suggesting that while David was out, Elena wasn't just resting, she was scavenging through his life. Psychologically, this turns the friend's house from a sanctuary into a panopticon, where everyone is watching David to see if he's noticed the cracks. David's reaction, observing the damp ring on the nightstand, is a move toward cognitive sovereignty. He is no longer accepting her verbal reality. He is prioritizing physical evidence. The citrusy cologne acts as a sensory anchor for his suspicion, a recurring ghost that proves his reality is being overwritten by her lies. I decided to play along. I became the clueless guest. But I started leaving traps. I placed a tiny piece of clear tape on the hinge of my laptop. I checked the browser history on the shared iPad in the living room. I found a series of searches for short-term rentals and Chicago divorce attorneys. But the red herring came that afternoon. I found a folded note in the pocket of Elena's coat while she was in the kitchen. Meet me at the pier at 4 o'clock. We need to finalize the surprise for David. Don't let him suspect. My heart leaped. A surprise? Was this all a massive misunderstanding? Was the man in the pea coat an event planner? Was Sarah's secrecy just her helping Elena plan an anniversary gift? The relief was so intense I felt lightheaded. I wanted to believe it. Every fiber of my being screamed for this to be the truth. I went to the pier at 4 p.m., staying out of sight. I saw Elena. She was standing by the railing, looking out at the gray water. A man approached her. Not the man in the pea coat, but someone else older carrying a briefcase. They spoke for 10 minutes. He handed her a thick envelope. She tucked it into her bag, kissed him on the cheek, and walked away. I followed the man. I watched him get into a taxi. As the car pulled away, I saw the logo on the side, Northwest Legal Services. It wasn't a surprise party. It was a surprise exit. I realized then that the man in the pea coat from the first night wasn't the lover. He was the architect of her new life. Elena wasn't just cheating. She was liquidating. She was using this trip to Chicago, away from our local bank branches and our mutual friends, to move assets into an account Marcus and Sarah were helping her hide. This block highlights the bargaining phase of betrayal. David's emotional response to the surprise note is a classic example of hope as a defense mechanism. His brain creates a red herring to protect itself from the devastating reality of the legal envelope. The contrast between his light-headed relief and the cold reality of the legal office logo represents the shattering of the last illusion. Elena's actions, the liquidating of assets, reveal a cold, calculated resource theft that goes beyond emotional infidelity. Through the behavior of the man with the briefcase, we see the professionalization of betrayal. Elena is treating the end of the marriage as a hostile takeover. David's action of following the man shows his shift from anxious husband to cold investigator. He realizes that his predictability wasn't just a character trait Elena disliked. It was the security vulnerability she used to rob him. I spent the final night of the trip in a state of hyperfocus. While everyone else was downstairs drinking wine and celebrating our last night in the city, I told them I was packing. I opened Elena's laptop. The tape I had placed earlier was gone. She had been in it again. But this time, she had left a window open, a chat log with Sarah. Sarah? Is he buying the migraine story? Elena, he's so easy, Sarah. He thinks he's being supportive. He has no idea the house is already listed for sale under the trust. Sarah, Marcus is nervous. He doesn't like lying to David's face. Elena, tell Marcus to stay strong. Once we're back, the papers get served, and David will be lucky if he keeps his car. I felt a cold, sharp clarity. It wasn't just an affair of the heart. It was a controlled demolition of my entire existence. They were waiting for us to get back home to serve me. They had used this friendship trip as a distraction while the legal gears ground my life to dust. I didn't yell. I didn't storm downstairs. I took photos of the chat. I exported the financial documents she had saved in a hidden folder titled Kitchen Remodel. Then, I did something Elena didn't expect. I called my own attorney back home and gave him the account numbers she had moved the money into. Freeze them, I said. Now, before we cross the state line. I walked downstairs and joined them. I even raised a glass. To friendship, I said, looking Marcus straight in the eye. He looked away, his hand trembling slightly as he held his wine. I realized then that Marcus wasn't a villain. He was a moral coward. And Sarah? She was the enabler who enjoyed the drama. But Elena was the strategist who had forgotten that I was the one who taught her how to play the game. Here illustrates the chain reaction of disclosure. The cause, Elena's arrogance and Sarah's curiosity, led to the effect, the chat log being left open, which in turn triggered David's legal counterstrike. The psychological tension peaks in the to friendship toast, a moment of psychological dominance, where David reclaims the narrative. Through Marcus's trembling hand, we see the weight of guilt in a secondary character, highlighting that the conspiracy of silence is a fragile structure. Elena's mistake was narcissistic overconfidence. She believed David's kindness was a permanent state of blindness. The lesson David learns is that trust is a luxury, and in the face of a hostile takeover, information is the only currency. By freezing the accounts before they even left Chicago, David transformed the effect of her betrayal into the cause of her own financial ruin. The drive home was 6 hours of a silence so thick it felt like physical pressure. Elena tried to play the role of the tired wife, leaning her head against the window. "It was a good trip, wasn't it?" she asked softly as we crossed the border into our home state. "It was a very illuminating trip, Elena," I said. We pulled into our driveway. The house, the one she thought she had already sold, stood there, dark and silent. I didn't turn off the engine. "Why aren't we going in?" she asked, a flicker of genuine confusion in her eyes. "Because the locks were changed 4 hours ago," I said, handing her a manila envelope I had pulled from under my seat. "And because the kitchen remodel folder on your laptop was very helpful in drafting these." She opened the envelope. Her eyes scanned the papers, the freeze on the accounts, the temporary restraining order, and the countersuit for fraud. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just looked at me, her face a mask of pure, cold shock. You knew. I saw the man in the pea coat, Elena. I saw the legal envelope at the pier. And I saw Sarah's chat logs. You thought I was easy because I was kind. But you forgot that I'm the one who built the foundation you tried to steal. A black car pulled up behind us. My lawyer and 2 process servers stepped out. "Your things are at Sarah's house in Chicago," I said, my voice level and calm. "Since you like it there so much, I figured you should stay. The car you're sitting in? It's registered to my firm. You have 10 minutes to get out before I report it stolen." The climax is a symmetric reversal. David uses Elena's own tactics, secrecy, legal maneuvering, and sudden displacement, against her. Through the appearance of the process servers, we see the institutionalization of the conflict. Elena's character undergoes a status collapse. She goes from being the predator to the exposed. Her question, "You knew," reveals her psychological locus of control has been shattered. The predictable husband has become the unpredictable adversary. This block highlights the alternative scenario. If David had confronted her in Chicago, she would have had time to move the funds or hide the evidence. By waiting, he ensured the cause of her shock was absolute. The friendship with Sarah and Marcus is revealed to be a parasitic alliance that has now left Elena with nowhere to go but back to the scene of her crime. The months that followed were a surgical separation. Elena tried to fight, but the digital trail I had captured in Chicago was undeniable. Marcus and Sarah were named as unindicted co-conspirators in the financial fraud suit, which effectively ended their standing in their own social circle. I stayed in the house. I repainted the guest room first. I got rid of the lavender scents and the soft edges. I filled the space with things that were sturdy, honest, and mine. I realized that trust is not a house you build once and live in forever. It's a garden that requires constant weeding. I had let the weeds grow because I liked the flowers, but the weeds were the ones strangling the life out of us. I don't hate Elena. I just realized that the woman I married never truly existed. She was a structural flaw I had mistaken for a design feature. As I sat on my porch, watching the sun set over my own quiet street, I felt a sense of integrated autonomy. I wasn't just a husband anymore. I was a man who knew exactly what his life was built on. Nearly 30% of marriages face situations of hidden financial betrayal, and I was one of them. But I wasn't the victim. I was the architect of my own survival. The Chicago trip was the end of a lie and the beginning of the truth. The narrative of David and Elena is a masterclass in the strategic power of kindness. David's growth is a journey from passive compliance to tactical sovereignty. He used the very trait Elena mocked, his perceived simplicity, as a camouflage to dismantle her sophisticated deception. Elena's downfall was her belief that she was the only intelligent actor in the room. Her betrayal was parasitic, requiring the corruption of friends and the theft of shared assets. Sensory details, the damp ring on a nightstand, the smell of citrus cologne, the disappearance of a piece of tape, are the true foundations of reality when words become lies. By moving the conflict to Chicago, the story highlights that betrayal often seeks foreign ground to hide, but the truth is jurisdiction-free. David moved from being a resident in his own life to being its owner. Elena's arc is a descent into irrelevance, proving that a life built on liquidating others eventually leaves you with no solid ground. The final thought, that truth is the only material that lasts, serves as the emotional closure. David isn't just moving on. He is building right, proving that resilience is the only foundation that can never be stolen.